Let me just begin by thanking you all for being here. Pleased to be out of Washington, back in Connecticut with my friend and colleague, Senator Murphy. Let me just begin, although it's not the topic of our press conference this morning, by saying how much I appreciate Governor Lamont's leadership in advancing a plan for delivering and distributing the vaccine in Connecticut. This vaccine is enormously promising and exciting. Both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines will be available in December in thousands of doses, possibly tens of thousands of doses. And Governor Lamont is leading the nation, literally at the forefront and the tip of the spear in making sure that this vaccine reaches priority groups in nursing homes, healthcare workers, emergency responders, with the first trough of these vaccines. And then in the second phase, people who are over 65, at-risk workers, and others who should have priority. And hopefully by the middle or toward the end of next year, many other groups also. And I just want to take a moment to say that prioritizing nursing homes may seem somewhat controversial. I spoke to the governor this morning about this plan, and he points out correctly that nursing homes are not only the place where the most at-risk people may be living and where they are dying, literally, disproportionately, but also where they may go from those places to hospitals. This plan saves hospitals an additional burden. It also addresses a place that is at highest risk, our nursing homes, and the people who work there, so as to stop the spread and help to save lives. The governor also gave me a number that I think is important to show why what we're doing in Washington is so important and why we have to act with urgency and effectiveness. Connecticut is spending about $20 million a week, $20 million a week on testing. That money runs out at the end of this year. There's no immediate source for additional money. $20 million a week in Connecticut alone for testing is absolutely vital. And it is one of the needs that we're hoping to address in an interim package under negotiation right now. There is no way that Congress should leave town without approving some pandemic relief package. In good conscience, we cannot go home for the holidays without meeting the needs of Connecticut's people and all around the country, people who are hurting. The day before Thanksgiving, I went to the food rescue lines at Rentschler Field and helped to distribute food to literally a mile or more cars in line in Connecticut. That scene is duplicated all around the country, in fact, all around our state. The day after Thanksgiving, I went to the lines of testing at the VA facility and St. Vincent's in Bridgeport. And again, lines of cars waiting for testing so as to ease the threat of this pandemic. We are in one of the darkest, most dangerous periods in our state's history. And it will only be worse in the next 6 to 8 weeks. We are also in the midst of a national economic crisis. The job numbers this morning show that job creation is slowing, a very discouraging sign, deeply damaging to our economy with possible long-term effects if we fail to act. This economic crisis could do structural damage deeply and irreparably to our economy and to the lives of ordinary people if we fail to act now. So we need to meet the moment with the kind of urgency that it demands. And that's why this stopgap proposal, it is only a down payment, $908 billion, far short of what we sought initially, provides a solid basis to go forward with talks toward an eventual package that must be done by the end of next week or thereabouts. I'm encouraged by the bipartisan effort that we're seeing in real time. Bipartisanship is going to be absolutely necessary to pass this blueprint for the future. Democrats are offering support, but so far, Mitch McConnell has failed to endorse it with the kind of unequivocal support that is necessary for it to go forward. This measure is essential to Connecticut in the aid for our state and local governments, in the $35 million for our hospitals and healthcare providers, the $288 billion that would be provided for small businesses. I talked yesterday to a roundtable by Zoom of restaurant owners, more than 100 of them, literally struggling to survive, hanging by a thread, paying their employees out of their own pockets to keep them sustained during the holiday season. Even operating at a loss, they want to keep their employees on the job. So we can talk about all of the specifics in this measure, including, by the way, $45 billion for transportation, including our railroads like Amtrak and Metro North, the state and local aid for $160 billion, unemployment insurance extension, the governor's talking about it this morning, for $100 billion. These kinds of measures are absolutely essential, and I think they will be welcomed by governors like our own. But let me just say, this measure is a life preserver. It's not the end game. It's not a solution. That will come from President Biden after January 20th. We only have one president at a time. We need for President Trump to lead or get out of the way so Congress can approve this measure. It is truly a down payment, just a beginning, and we need to do much more. And I want to also say that I am alarmed by some of the reports that we've seen about potential cyber attacks on our supply infrastructure for the vaccine. There are reports, and I'm talking about what's available publicly, not anything I've learned through any other channels, that there may be state-sponsored attacks on the supply chain for this vaccine, on the storage and delivery mechanisms, particularly the cold chain, the freezing facilities that are required to deliver it. These cyber attacks are very alarming, and part of what we need in this package is resources to combat those kinds of attacks. So I'm encouraged. We are moving in the right direction, and I am hoping by the end of next week we can tell the people of Connecticut that help is on the way. It must be on the way before we leave for the holidays. So with that, let me turn it over to Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. I don't know how people in Connecticut survive the winter without additional federal relief. It's hard to put into words the desperation that is seeping into this state as unemployment benefits expire over Christmas, eviction protections disappear, and job growth slows, this winter could be a mass extinction event for small businesses throughout this state, especially in the hospitality industry. How on earth does a small mom and pop restaurant survive a winter with no outdoor dining, with limited indoor seating, as infection rates continue to climb? It's impossible. So this is an existential question for families and for businesses. If this legislation doesn't pass by the end of the year, it is not hyperbole to say that lives will be at stake. Businesses will collapse. The stakes are that high. I was in contact with Speaker-elect Ritter this week, talking about the importance to the state budget of this funding. The state budget has a shortfall in the coming year, an even bigger one in the out year. As Dick mentioned, the state is making extraordinary expenditures every single week on public health preparedness, on testing. And the state's going to need to spend some really big dollars to build out a vaccine distribution program. It's estimated that we need at least $10 billion nationally just to begin the vaccine distribution program. If you total up just the state and local assistance in the bipartisan compromise, along with the educational system assistance, that's about $240 billion. Now, it's never perfect, but Connecticut tends to get about 1% of any pot of federal money. So that's about $2.4 billion for Connecticut, just with respect to state aid and support for our schools. That's significant. That could prevent a tax increase here in Connecticut. That could make sure that we're building wraparound services for special education kids who are returning to classrooms. That will certainly assure that we build out a vaccine distribution plan that works. So this is money that is desperately needed by our states today. But as Dick said, we're not there yet. I've been in regular contact with the small handful of Republicans and Democrats that are negotiating this package. I've been talking to my Republican colleagues, trying to drum up support for it. We made progress over the course of this week. It was very discouraging that within hours of this bipartisan proposal being unveiled, Mitch McConnell undermined it by unveiling his own skimpy and totally insufficient proposal. But as the week went on, more Republican senators started to understand how this package could work. Negotiations continued. And we left Washington last night more optimistic than ever that we could get some version of this relief package done. There's a lot of things in this package that I don't like. It's certainly not big enough. But we cannot go into the holiday without passing something, without getting unemployment benefits turned back on, and without getting some relief to our state's municipalities and schools. Lastly, let me mention two other areas that are of critical importance. We need to make sure that Amtrak and Metro North are still around when this pandemic passes. Right now, our railroads in Connecticut are hemorrhaging money, understandably. Nobody's on the tracks today. Nobody's buying tickets to ride. But if Amtrak and Metro North don't get an infusion of money this winter, they're going to start having to sell assets. They're going to start having to engage in massive layoffs. And once we do get beyond the pandemic in 2021, that service may be gone. So the significant funding in this bill, $45 billion, some of it earmarked for Amtrak and the Northeast Corridor, could help us make sure that that rail service is still there when the pandemic passes and people start to go back to work in person at larger numbers. Lastly, I mentioned it quickly, but let me say it again. The vaccine distribution plan that the CDC has put together is not funded. It's not funded. And this legislation would make sure that we could start making the down payments on staff and infrastructure here in Connecticut to make sure that when that vaccine is ready for full public distribution, we're not playing catch up. So we need Mitch McConnell to come to the negotiating table. We need him to understand that this is a package that can pass the Senate. We need Mitch McConnell to give us a vote. Give us a vote next week on this package, or come to the table and negotiate something close to this package, because our state and other states around the country can't survive if we don't get it done. Be happy to take questions.
Senator, you're both talking about that you hope this package passed, but you're also talking about all these problems that aren't going to be solved with hope. They're going to be solved with solutions. So I know Mr. McConnell has to come to the bargaining table, but what are you two willing to do for Connecticut to get this passed confidently next week and not just hope that we get it?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I spent all last week talking with my Republican colleagues, trying to find a way to get them to yes, trying to understand what their concerns were. We are using our voice here in Connecticut, in Washington, and all around the nation to try to put pressure on Senator McConnell to do the right thing. I was on the phone with the administration this week, talking to them about the importance of passing this relief package. So every single day we are actively engaged with our colleagues in the Senate, in Congress, and in the administration, trying to find a way to yes. That's the business of politics, trying to find a way to get folks to a place where we can pass this measure. Now, the other thing we're doing is being reasonable, not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. As Dick mentioned, this doesn't get the job done. $900 billion is going to be a down payment on a package that needs to ultimately be much bigger. And so as desperation increases, I think our willingness to compromise gets bigger. And so maybe 3 months ago, I wouldn't have been willing to support a package of this size, but today, I think it's important that we get something done. We get money into the hands of families. We get money down to states. And I think we're being as flexible as we can be, given the stakes right now.
Yeah, I think Chris put it well. Being reasonable is important. In some ways, this package is just a Band-Aid. The money for rail is inadequate. That $45 billion is for the nation as a whole. I've talked to the president of Metro North. $12 billion alone for Metro North is necessary, and there's no way this money is going to cover that amount. I'm willing to take the heat for a package that puts us in the right direction, but may not be everything we want. And in some ways, I think that's going to be required. It will be controversial with folks who wanted a lot more, as we did. But I'm willing to take the heat and to cajole and counsel my Republican friends, as I did yesterday, for example, with Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who was on his way to the White House. And I gave him a very pointed reminder that we need Donald Trump to be a partner here. So we're reaching out to our colleagues and to others who are affected because, Chris put very well the economic survival that's at stake. But it's more than just people's jobs, it's lives, literally. Our hospitals will be, again, overwhelmed. And I describe for my colleagues what it is like to be in a state that is going through a crisis where there aren't enough hospital beds. There aren't enough doctors and nurses. There aren't enough ventilators. And lives are lost. When I present that picture to my colleagues and they're seeing it building in their own state, they understand that it is an existential threat, not only to their economies, but also to the literal survival of the people in their states. And by the way, again, to be very blunt, I'm telling small business owners, doctors, nurses, to reach out to their colleagues in other states. And I'm naming names, to tell their senators, you have to vote for this package. You can't be a deficit hawk now in the United States Congress. We need this down payment. It may be only a Band-Aid in our eyes, but it will help save lives, literally save lives.
On the restaurants, both of you specifically talked about restaurants. We've already had restaurants, 600 restaurants closed, and that was in the good old days when you could eat outside. Now you're talking about snow or no outdoor dining. How bad are you saying it's going to get? Are we going to have double the restaurants that are going to go out of business? I mean, like I said, we had 600 when you could eat outside, and everybody thought that was a great idea when you could eat outside. How bad will it get?
I mean, it'll be dependent on what kind of package we get done. And remember, this is, listen, let's be clear, there's always a baseline of restaurants that are closing. So, that 600 number should probably be compared to the number of restaurants that would close on an annual basis, regardless of a pandemic. But this was also during a period of time when you had access to the PPP program and the EIDL program. So it just shows you how dire the situation is for restaurants, is that even with access to subsidy, there were many restaurants that couldn't make it work. A substantial portion of this package has to be dedicated to business relief and specifically to hospitality relief. I'm a co-sponsor of something called the Restaurants Act, which is a specific piece of bipartisan legislation that is targeted to the hospitality industry. And I do think it makes sense to carve out and treat the hospitality industry differently, because they are so badly affected by public health regulations and changes in the allowances for individuals inside restaurants and stores. So I would like to see a standalone piece of legislation passed to help the hospitality industry, but I do agree that any package we pass is going to have significant targeted money to restaurants, and hopefully that will be able to get many of these across the finish line this winter.
Yeah, I'm a supporter as well of the Restaurants Act. There's also the Restart Act, the Save Our Stages Act, which applies to the live venues. And many of these measures are combined in the $908 billion, again, at a greatly reduced level. And if we can do a separate measure for each of these sectors of the economy, all the better. But this step is a start in the right direction.
You guys have used the word stopgap, Band-Aid. Even if you get the Republicans to go along with a package, whatever it is, whether it's this $900 billion or less or a little bit more, what gives you confidence that they're going to turn around and be willing to do more in January? Aren't they just going to say, look, we didn't want to do this in the first place, all right, the vaccines are coming, things are going to be better, maybe we don't really need to spend all this kind of money, as you mentioned, perhaps they suddenly rediscover the deficit, now that there's a Democratic president in office. So what gives you any expectation that Republicans will be willing to do more after this, if they're willing to take this step, this interim step, as you see?
Don't forget, Paul, we passed 3 major pandemic relief packages by overwhelming bipartisan majorities. That's what we should have done months ago with the HEROES Act, $3.4 trillion, that the House passed. Mitch McConnell's failure of leadership prevented it from happening. We've done it before, and my hope is we're going to do it again in a very significant, bold, robust way. So this impasse is an aberration. We can't let it become the pattern. And we have been successful before in passing these bipartisan relief packages. The CARES Act was more than $2 trillion. That's the kind of package that we'll need, and I think a new administration under Joe Biden will help lead it.
Let me, so I think there is a question as to how Mitch McConnell is going to behave once Joe Biden is president. Listen, I hope that Dick is right, and I hope that the relationship Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden have will lead to legislation passing, including another COVID relief package. But I was in the Senate, I guess I was in, not the Senate, I was in the Congress in 2009. I watched Mitch McConnell stand in the way of economic relief legislation when the unemployment rate was much higher than it is today, because his priority was stopping everything and anything that Barack Obama wanted to do in his first term. So I certainly worry about our ability to get legislation done in 2021, which is in part why it's so important to get this bill done. Dick and I don't agree on much, but I don't disagree on a lot. I don't know that I would call this a Band-Aid. I mean, I think that $2.4 billion to the state of Connecticut is significant. It's not enough, but that's a significant down payment on Connecticut's budget shortfall, and it would fund a lot of very important programs here. We definitely have to come back and get more, but if this package ends up being, around 700, 800, or 900 billion dollars, that's still, relief to the state and to hospitals and to schools that will make a difference. But I am worried about our ability to get another package done next year.
By the way, I'll call it a big Band-Aid. A big Band-Aid.
One of those, yeah.
Maybe a tourniquet. A tourniquet. I don't think we disagree on the need for additional aid.
That's right.
Important.
That's right.
Do you think the fact that control of the Senate comes down to these two runoff elections in Georgia, do you think that might increase Republican willingness and Democratic willingness to reach a compromise because each side doesn't want to be seen as causing problems with COVID-19 relief going into this critical election?
I mean, listen, if the Senate is 50-50, it's not likely that the rules are going to change, meaning you're still going to need bipartisan cooperation. But if Democrats control the Senate, it means that we control the agenda. We control what goes on the floor. That matters because if you put this bipartisan compromise on the floor of the Senate next week, it would pass. It would get 60 votes. And so Mitch McConnell's refusal to put legislation on the floor often stops consensus from being achieved. So I think the stakes are really high in Georgia. If we win those seats in Georgia, then I think we will pass another pandemic relief bill in 2021. If we lose in Georgia, then I think the chances are 50-50 at best that we pass another pandemic relief bill in 2021.
And I would just look ahead a little bit. The race in Georgia is only a prelude to 2022. And Republican colleagues know they're going to be on their own in 2022. They're going to be held accountable for causing deaths, literally, destroying lives, if they fail to act on a major pandemic relief package. So they should know they'll be held accountable if they're responsible for those lives lost.
On the 45 billion, on the rails, how much of that do we get? In other words, I would assume we would get more than the 1% that you guys talked about because we got more railroads here than Florida. So what kind of money are we talking about for Metro North, for the region, for Connecticut?
The most I can tell you is that it will be in the billions. We don't have a precise number. We're going to be fighting for more than our fair share. We deserve more than the 1% that ordinarily would be going to Connecticut because this part of the rail infrastructure is critical to the busiest and densest part of rail transportation in the United States. And it is essential not just to passenger and commuter traffic, but also to freight. So I can't give you a precise number, but we're going to be fighting for everything we deserve. And again, it's the first tranche, not the end.
And what will happen is my understanding is that there will be a dedicated tranche of money to Amtrak, and then there will be money for commuter rails. So Connecticut will essentially get 2 bites of the apple here, money that we can use for Metro North, and then Amtrak will get a chunk of money that it'll be able to use system-wide. But honestly, Amtrak, when it gets money, uses almost all of that on the Northeast corridor. I think our goal here is to try to get an amount of money for Amtrak in this package that is at least as big as their annual appropriation, so as to effectively sort of double the amount of money that Amtrak is getting this year. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.